I believe that people that have a lot of success have figured out how to show up at their best no matter what the circumstances are. So I would say for me, peak performance is having the practices, the rituals, and the habits that allow you to show up at your best when the average person would be totally out of commission or might make poor decisions or might just not show up at all or show up as less than who they are in their integrity.
All right. Welcome back to another episode of the Freedom Culture Podcast. My name is Samantha Lotus. I am one of the organizers of this mastermind and event, and it is my absolute pleasure, my delight to be here sitting with a new friend, someone that I heard about from a few of our members, somebody that was introduced to me as a human that I needed to meet, that I needed to interview, that has so much wisdom and experience and knowledge to share to the world. And so I probably won't even do you justice in introducing you. So I would like to just pass you the mic and allow you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Bohdi. I'm a peak performance and longevity coach. My background's in traditional Chinese medicine. I spent 10 years in Asia studying with teachers of martial arts and healing arts, mainly because my family had some health challenges that I didn't know how to help them. Western medicine didn't know how to help them. So that was my origin, eventually becoming an acupuncturist and an herbalist in the States.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Similar story. I was going to become a doctor in psychiatry. I realized that wasn't my thing. I went and studied in Korea, learned about Ayurveda and traditional Chinese medicine for very similar reasons, recognizing that our current health and allopathic model is really not the most effective model for true health and healing. And so that's really cool. So with peak performance and longevity, what does that mean for you? What does that look like for you? Like if somebody is in their peak state of performance and longevity, what does that mean?
Well, I mean, for one thing, it means I believe that people that have a lot of success have figured out how to show up at their best no matter what the circumstances are. So I would say for me, peak performance is having the practices, the rituals, and the habits that allow you to show up at your best when the average person would be totally out of commission or might make poor decisions or might just not show up at all or show up as less than who they are in their integrity. So I think that's the peak performance part. Now, you can show up in peak performance, but you can be borrowing from your longevity. And I see that as the primary paradigm of biohacking and peak performance is borrow from your future to show up now, burn the candle at both ends.
Yep.
And my stand is that you don't have to pick.
I love that. You know, something that we've been talking about a lot and what I'm really focused on right now is ending binary consciousness, ending the polarity consciousness that it has to be either or. And how can it be both? How can we come together and recognize that we can be super successful and powerful and impactful as entrepreneurs, and it doesn't need to come at the cost of our health? And what I'm hearing from you, the word that came to mind was resilient. How can we be resilient while being faced with everything that we're faced as, you know, high performance entrepreneurs? So what would be, how do you help people cultivate their physical, mental, emotional, spiritual or whatnot resiliency?
Yeah, so if we back up a little bit, the system I teach is called the Pathway of Power. And it involves 6 gates, which I did not invent. But when I really got into the depth of it, I realized that there were 6 areas where as human beings we either leaked energy or we garnered energy. And the other cool part about these gates is they're universal, which means there's wisdom traditions and ancient texts and old medicine about them. There's also neuroscience and quantum physics. So when I realized that, I just started to look at which gate does this person need right now. So, you know, breath work is probably the easiest, cheapest, most effective way to take control of your physiology, your emotional state, and your mental state. So that's one way. You know, a longer game is meditation. Yeah. So meditation is really powerful. Just to go slightly deeper into that, I'm very interested in our Paleolithic ancestors and the resurgence of primal culture. Tattoos and movement and festivals and just so many, like even adventure racing. We recognize that if we stop challenging our bodies, we turn off our evolutionary capacity.
Yeah, absolutely.
And part of that research is that we were programmed physiologically as hunter-gatherers. And what's replaced the food and the game and the herbs has been information. And we are now addicted to our smartphones and addicted. And so meditation is the only time besides when we get good sleep that we go from information gathering to information consolidation. And so if we don't consolidate, we're always going to be less than our highest self because there's all these open loops in our mind. So good sleep and good meditation are vital to peak performance as well. So those are two gates.
Yeah, you know, what that stimulates within me, thank you for saying that, we're really not as embodied anymore. We're really living in our mind for the most amount of time. And while we can produce a lot from our mind, what I'm experiencing is that it's more of a consumption, right? Our society is consumption society, and really in our mind, we're just taking in so much. This is the age of information, and we're not being balanced in our contribution to the world. Potentially, but also into our bodies. Like, how are we moving? How are we expanding? Because it's either growing or it's decomposing. And so what I'm recognizing in the people that I work with is that our minds and our capacities and like the coding and the work that we're creating is growing, and yet we are really suffering in our bodies. And especially as entrepreneurs, and especially for men in the entrepreneurial world that haven't been exposed to these kinds of modalities and trainings, we're seeing that decomposition of the physical body and the nervous system and the endocrine systems. And so I'd love for you to just talk about that, like some of your experience with this phenomenon.
Yeah, well, the first piece is that, you know, because I got into this work from a place of wanting to influence my family, and then later in Chinese medicine school, which has 30% of the curriculum is Western medicine, I had to learn to speak about this in Western terms, and I started to find all the science for it. So one piece that really speaks to what you just talked about is that we now know very clearly from science that our heart produces its own neurotransmitters. The heart's electromagnetic field determines whether or not we access peak performance in our brain.
Yep.
We know our gut is filled with this microbiome of bacteria, and when it's off balance, its waste product is the neurotransmitters of depression. When it's balanced, it produces dopamine and serotonin. So I guess what I would say to people listening, and like what I keep reminding my clients about, is like, you have three centers of intelligence, and if you only care for one, you're going to have a life that only reflects that, and it's usually not fulfilling.
Yeah.
You know. So, yeah.
Bringing in some sacred geometry, some sacred numerology, the 33.333333, right? 33% of your brain, 33% of your heart, 33% of your gut, your intuition. And most people don't know that our serotonin and our dopamine, these neurotransmitters, the feel-good hormones, are synthesized in our gut and sent upwards through our enteric nervous system. So it's not just in the brain, which is so interesting, because in Western medicine, it's like, oh, you're depressed or you're anxious, there's something wrong with your brain chemicals. So let's just prescribe you some pills to activate these brain chemicals, while totally disregarding what you're eating, your environments, how much time you're not having in nature, how much time you're connected to everything electromagnetic frequency. And there's just such a lack of a holistic perspective. I love the birds.
The birds are liking it.
The birds are loving it.
Yeah.
So what would you say, somebody coming to you that, like, what I experience is some of the people are just so far away from the ability to meditate, from the ability to find stillness. It's like so far from the reality. How can we create like integrative practices? How can we create a bridge to get them from like A-type, super stressed out, high strung, always on the go, literally like on their phones while they're peeing, to a more restful, regenerative state?
So I have two answers to that. The first one is the main thing that I teach people is a breath technique called MBA, which is, you know, movement, breath, alignment, mind, body, advantage. It doesn't matter what it stands for, but it's an inhale and an open, an exhale through the mouth and a close. And it's specifically designed to strengthen the vagal tone. Because anyway, we could go into it deeper if you're interested. If we have time, I'm happy to go into it. But the bottom line is, in 3 or 5 minutes of that practice, even the most stressed out person will experience a massive swing into parasympathetic. Their mind will get quiet.
Being rest and digest for those of you. Sympathetic being fight or flight, parasympathetic being rest and digest.
Yeah, exactly. So when you're just so wired that you can't perform very well, like you're running through tasks on your to-do list, you're cutting off relationships because you're in survival mode for your business or what you have to get done, that's fight or flight, and that's not sustainable. Anyway, so the first thing I do is the breath work, and I really haven't met anybody that didn't have a profound response. It might have taken 15 minutes, but most people 2 or 3 breaths like that, sets of 9 breaths, and they're there.
Wow.
And now they're interested. And then the second answer is I use biofeedback. I use both a heart rate variability monitor from HeartMath as well as a Muse headband that senses EEG. Now I can see my clients' meditations. They're getting immediate feedback. And the type A personality likes it because they can compete
Yep.
against themselves.
Absolutely.
So-
I know I've done some of those QEEG brain mappings, and it was so interesting when I was in a chronic state of fight or flight, running 3 companies and putting together all of these different events. My brain, there was so much hyperactivity in the left side of the brain, and it actually wasn't communicating and firing with the right side of the brain. And a lot of the work that Dr. Joe Dispenza does with the QEEGs and monitoring the brain, and how meditation and these different relaxation techniques actually helps to synthesize the neurochemicals and the synapses to fire and wire together, which again, like you said, produces the hormones that actually help you feel better and regenerate.
Yeah, and like to just circle back on something, most of the pharmaceutical interventions for depression, what they do is they either open the pathway for the dopamine, the serotonin, or they block its reuptake.
Yeah.
But what'll happen is the body will start to not produce it.
Mm-hmm.
And then they'll have to do higher doses. And now you're getting so far from balance, and people have this blunted emotion. They don't feel a lot of love for life. And so just, I really encourage people, like, you can use those pharmaceuticals as a bridge, as a Band-Aid, and then, but then learn to produce your own, learn to deal with stress, learn to heal those emotional things. I mean, I was talking at some point, and I had this recognition because I just come out of a retreat, is that, a man, a CEO, leader of his company, leader of his family, sometimes his greatest access to peak performance is to fall apart and cry. And that will be the true foundation for peak performance. And yet almost nobody associates a emotionally vulnerable person who's willing to not know and to not have the answers and to be in their angst, that catharsis, it's like taking a shit. It's
release.
You need to release before you can put good stuff in. So anyway, I just encourage them. I'm a big stand for men to really do that inner healing work while getting stuff done in their life, while building their companies. Like, that's a lot of my one-to-one clients are men who just need a safe masculine space, and they want the Jedi techniques to show up and run their companies better. So
that's so fascinating. I feel that 60% of my clients are men. I am a woman, and yet I have a very masculine type of energy in the way that I work with people. And I feel that I call myself a lifestyle alchemist. Nobody even knows what that means, but I get to create it. And what of the process that we're speaking of is alchemy in my mind. It's observing what is, allowing for the decomposition, for the breaking down, right? And oftentimes the biggest breakthroughs with these men that I work with are when they fully allow themselves to shatter all of the identities, all of the constructs, all of the stories, all of the pressure, right? The conditioning, the socialization, the traumas, the wounds, repressed emotion, where they just open up and allow it all to pour out through that breakdown, through the shattering. That's where the phoenix rises again. That's where alchemy is. And so the third step of alchemy is reconstruction and taking dense metal and turning it into gold. And that, I don't believe that can fully happen unless we allow for ourselves to fully decompose and let go.
that's beautiful.
So even before moving into peak performance, it's how can we clear ourselves? How can we be a clear vessel for the new emergent to come through?
Yeah, and so the gate one in the pathway of power is the shadow gate. So it's all about checking in on those emotions, those wounds from childhood, checking in on their ability to have emotional expression. And then the other part of shadow work, at least with most of the men I work with, I call it is mask removal.
Because those identities.
How do men mask their vulnerability? Masturbation, alcohol, sugar, caffeine, and cannabis. MASCC. So I help men recalibrate that relationship, because it's not about them being bad.
No.
It's about, is your relationship with them celebratory or is it dependent?
Yeah.
Is it covering? Yeah. And so when they come off them, I have them come off one at a time for about a week and then stack. So they start with no masturbation. That includes Netflix and social media as well as porn and whatever. Yeah. Then their testosterone comes up. Then we take alcohol out if it's in the picture.
Yeah.
Now their willpower comes up. Their liver releases a little bit of emotion. Then you take out sugar, which is usually the hardest.
Yeah.
And then finally caffeine and cannabis. But anyway, what happens during this time period while they meditate 3 times a day for 5 minutes is they notice where those substances are plugging into them.
Yeah.
And once, like, oh my God, every time I think of my mother or my ex, that's when I want to drink. Okay.
Recognizing those triggers.
Those triggers. Yeah. Every time I'm anxious and wired, I want to masturbate because then I can sleep.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow, what a terrible way to manage a sleep problem, to throw away your hormonal reserves.